Hey class, Dr. Doug Brown here. I hope that your week is starting off to be fantastic. We have an exciting week. This week we will build upon what we learned last week, the first week of the class. Certainly hope that you enjoyed that. We took a look at some budgets and discussed how the different budgets work, the budget process. We compared private versus public EMS, discussed the quality of care. As we move on this week, we have a great discussion. I think we'll build upon, as I said, we'll build upon what we did last week, and then we'll examine some different budgets. Now, there are three budgets there that you can take a look at. I've included the budget for Memphis Fire because they also do their fire-based EMS, and I thought that might be interesting to take a look at since many of you work in that type of system. Some of you work in a private system, or there's a private system in your community. Interestingly, here in the South, as I mentioned, typically fire departments don't do non-emergency transfers. That's pretty much where your money is made at. And those are guaranteed payments. And then, of course, on emergencies, it's not so much so. You're not guaranteed that you're going to get reimbursement on all those transfers. Not everybody has insurance or Medicaid or Medicare. And then even at that, the reimbursement is typically limited. So there's a lot of services that have complained that they're having a tough time making it, especially if they're just doing emergencies. And not non-emergencies. They have to increase that volume and get that run numbers up in order to make it and try to create sort of an economy of scale, if you will, by utilizing all the equipment, staffing, and balancing it out where one thing connects to the other to create that economy of scale to make it worthwhile. This week we're going to take a look at labor contracts, how they impact the local budget. That's a huge issue. Pretty much when it comes to unions, maybe in the north, I guess they're more prominent. Here they're not so much. Pretty much every fire service has a union. Some don't here, but pretty much everybody is part of IFF. When it comes to EMS, there's just essentially no unions here. And I don't know of any service here in my state or in the South, for example, that really has a union when it's a third service, a public utility model, or a private company. So there's just not a lot going on there. When it comes to labor contract impacts on the budget, but certainly does on the fire side, and the community must take a look at that and consider the negotiations on the insurance, the negotiation on any overtime that may be afforded, any of those opportunities are annual raises. And on the EMS side here, it's typically merit-based raises. I've seen a decrease in that. It used to be that you could get up to 6% salary increase for doing an extraordinary job. The average was about 4 or 5%. And now here on the EMS side, we're seeing those merit-based raises decrease as insurance costs and some of the other benefits, retirement, have increased. And so those are more available now with some of the different insurance changes and retirement, etc. Excuse me. It's common just to get 1.5% to 2% raise, which is not a lot of money annually, and that has a huge impact, I think, on your personal budget as compared to what used to be 6%. But that has helped the municipalities in those communities that do operate their own ambulance service. And about 3% is about the average here on the fire service side. Annual increases when it comes to labor contracts, and then certainly the negotiations on insurance. Now, part of that is the municipalities or the government are they're really taking a look at those different insurance costs and other ways that they can reduce. For example, they may wait about buying a new apparatus, replacing a ladder company or an engine this year, and wait for another year or two so they can save money one way or the other. reduction in budgets are typically something that's been happening for a while in the government sector. We see that pretty much across the board, across the country, and it's impacted in some states more than it is others. For example, if you look at two states I think of that I'm aware of, and that's Alabama and Oklahoma, they have a huge budget crisis right now. It seems that we stay 3 to 4 years behind the rest of the country. So when everybody else is dropping off, we tend to do well for 3 or 4 years, and then when everybody else is doing well, we drop off. And I think that's what's happening here in this case to impact the budget. And they're having to, the state governments, local governments are really having to, scratch and really search and try to identify ways to save money. Because there's, the budgets are being decreased, and we see this with a number of fire runs that we have here. There's not as many fire runs in the community as saying, look, places are not burning. Why should we invest money into the fire service? But the number of medical calls are going up, and so just something to think about. And then we'll compare budgets. You have an opportunity to compare the budgets and see the positives and negatives and discuss those in your summit. And then, of course, we will do the same thing in our discussion this week with our budget comparison. Our questions this week: what was the most interesting differences and similarities between the three budgets? Do any of the expenses in the budget surprise you? Does either of the budgets that you obtain include EMS operations? And what did you notice about the per capita cost? And did those surprise you? You might share some of your some extra thoughts about that on your own local budget, or any other thoughts that you may have on the budget that you examined this week, from your perspective. And it's a little bit different perspective. Let's say from a line firefighter side or EMT paramedic. To a leader, a captain, a chief, an assistant chief, someone that may be involved with some of that budgetary process, or may be assigned a task of reducing the budget. And if you haven't worked around a firehouse, very often, there's a lot of things we have to do on our own. We buy our own food. Typically, the telephone may be in our name. The cable TV may be in our name. Satellite dish, whatever. There's a lot of things that we do ourselves that are certainly not part of that budget. They essentially cover those minimum services, apparatus maintenance, fuel, employee costs, etc. They don't cover all the other extra. That's something that we have to do. So when you take a look at this, you think about the municipal budget, but then you also have to think about your own personal budget. How does any of this impact you? So we have a very good discussion this week. Again, building up on what we did last week. You've done some impressive work with the discussions in the papers. I commend you for that. Week 2 is always an interesting week, I think, because we have some of those basics out of the way. And I look forward to seeing your discussions and your assignments this week. If you need any help, let me know. Please take a look at the examples I shared in the announcements. If you've not looked at the final assignment, please take a look at that final assignment. It's always important to be prepared for it. And if you need me, give me a call, send me an email, and text me. I'll do everything I can to help you. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you in the discussions.